Hey everybody, welcome back to your Birch and Bit of Wisdom. So today's lesson is on determining point of view. This is RI6. So remember, this is part of your recovery for your Unit 2 retake, which you do on Tuesday. So let's make sure we go ahead and mark our text and really understand what we're talking about so we can be really successful in our retake. So let's go ahead and get started. So we're talking about author's point of view. And when we talk about author's point of view, there are a couple things that we have to consider. We have to consider the thoughts, the feelings, and the actions and attitudes of the people that are involved. And that way that can give us a point of view. It's like any type of disagreement we get in with anybody. There are always two sides to every story. So determining the author's point of view, how they feel about the topic, can help us understand what they're trying to say and their central idea. So I have this picture in front of me, and this picture I think is really awesome. So the question above it says, can you figure out the feelings of the people watching the parade in the picture below? And it says, circle any clues that help you figure out their viewpoints or their points of view. So we've got these three people over here. There's this awesome parade going. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and look at the topic. So the topic of this picture is this giant parade, right? We see the marching band there. We see people waving in the crowds. So there are two sides that our point of view can take. It can take a positive side or a positive attitude, or a negative side or a negative attitude. But keep in mind, we're all going back to the same topic of the parade. So when we look at the parade, our first piece of evidence that we have here is that you have a woman smiling, and there's a man in a baseball cap waving a flag. So we see these two people right here looking super happy. I think most of us can see that they're genuinely happy, so that's a positive attitude. So that point of view is that the man and woman are excited and happy to be watching the parade. Then we've got this little kid down here. Look at how happy Homescale is right there. I don't think he's really a big fan of parades and or marching bands, which is really sad. So my evidence for this is that, again, our topic is still the parade, and the child is frowning and holding his ears. So if you see someone holding their ears at something, we can probably infer that that's relatively negative. So our attitude toward that is negative. And our point of view is that the child dislikes the noise from the parade, which sometimes can be a good or a bad thing. And then what I want us to also think about too is that whenever we read something, we read for a purpose. We read for the author's purpose. And the author's purpose is the main reason for writing and the tone being adopted. And remember, we talked about this in our last video, that there are 4 different reasons why an author writes, or their perspective, or their purpose: to inform, to entertain, to persuade, and to reflect. So as we read, we're going to try to figure out which one of those is being conveyed through the author's purpose. So let's go ahead and continue on with our next part of our lesson. So what you see here in our modeled instruction is we have a brief excerpt from a scientific article. So we're talking about some science in class today, you guys. Let's get excited. So, what we have here is we have a scientific account from the eruption of Mount St. Helens. So this happened not too long ago, happened in the 80s. So let's go ahead and read about some information about Mount St. Helens. All right, here we go. And it says, it was a disaster, the stuff of nightmares, and yet it began in broad daylight. Ooh, that's a pretty good engaging hug, I think. On the morning of Sunday, May 18th, 1980, Mount St. Helens erupted with a horrendous blast that blew 1,300 feet off the top of the mountain. Within minutes, an ash cloud shot 15 miles into the sky. People up to 200 miles away could hear the roar of the volcano. And people as far away as Spokane, Washington, 350 miles from the mountain, watched in amazement as the ash from the black sky turned their world a powdery gray. Ooh, that's really descriptive. I like how this author writes. Okay, let's look at paragraph 2. Remember, we always have to number our paragraphs. So we should have 2 paragraphs on that page. Make sure that you have your paragraphs numbered. Always really important. So paragraph 2. It says, that morning, Craig Redinger of Richmond, Washington, was sunbathing with his wife. Redinger witnessed the ash cloud blot out all daylight and, terrified, thought it was the end of the world. To some it was. The terrible blast knocked down nearly 150 square miles of forest, felling trees like matchsticks. The dreadful eruption lasted 9 hours, but Mount St. Helens and the surrounding wilderness were forever changed within moments. Wow, that sounds pretty intense, doesn't it? So, what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and look at our question, and then we're going to look at our graphic organizer. So I'm going to go ahead and flip my camera real quick. Here we go. So what we have here is we have our topic, which is the eruption of Mount St. Helens. And as we've read, the question that we're thinking about is this question right here. What is the author's point of view about the eruption? I'm going to underline point of view because that part seems really important. So what is the author's point of view about the eruption? So our first piece of text evidence that we have is that it was a disaster, the stuff that nightmares are made of. Well, to me, that sounds really negative. So I put a negative sign there because our attitude towards it is negative. The next piece of evidence I have is a horrendous blast. And horrendous means something that's awful, terrifying, scary. And again, I thought that that was a negative attitude, so I put another negative down here. And then the third piece of evidence that I found was that we talked about Mr. Redinger up here, who thought that it was the end of the world. So again, if you think something is the end of the world, I don't know about y'all, but I don't think that sounds very positive. So I also put a negative sign here. So for right now, I say my author's point of view is that the eruption of Mount St. Helens is a remarkable but terrifying event because of the widespread damage it caused. Remember, it covered 150 square miles of forest. It was completely knocked down, and it lasted 9 hours. So that's stuff that's really important. So what I want you to do now here is with a partner, you're going to take turns rereading the first 2 paragraphs of the account. And I want you to circle all of the negative words used to describe the eruption of Mount St. Helens. So go ahead and go work with your partner. Take about a minute to go back through. And I should see some of these text markings when you turn these in so you can take your retake. I'm going to go ahead and flip my camera back around. Hey, everybody. And we're going to go ahead and continue. So we have our next 2 paragraphs on our next page. So again, we number our paragraphs 3 and 4. And we also have this little section over here called our close reading. So let's go ahead and look what our close reading says. And maybe that can help us figure out how to further analyze and determine the author's point of view. So the close reading says, think about the author's point of view on page 104. And page 104 was the page that we just read. So it's just this page right over here. So think about the author's point of view on page 104. Ooh, here we go. Then circle, I'm going to circle, well, because that makes sense. Circle the phrase that signals the shift in attitude. I'm going to underline that part. Shift in attitude in this part of the account. And think about why the author may have made this kind of shift. So shift is a change. So maybe they started off on the horrendous and tragic and really scary side of it. But now there might be something completely different. So as we read this section together, let's go ahead and look for that shift. So we're going to start with paragraph 3 and paragraph 4. Remember, we have to number our paragraphs. Super important. Makes life so much easier. I promise. Here we go. Paragraph 3. From a scientific perspective, however, the eruption was an exciting event. Ecologist Charlie Crisafulli points out that the volcanic devastation at Mount St. Helens provides insight into the reawakening of ecosystems. It is the most thoroughly studied large forest disturbance in the world, claims Crisafulli. The blast zone, one barren and uninhabitable, is gradually becoming fertile ground for growing numbers of plant and animal life. Like the mythical phoenix, the blast zone is rising from the ashes, reborn and very much alive. The spectacular event shocked and amazed many. Nature's ability to heal herself, however, is even more awe-inspiring. Well, I learned some stuff in those paragraphs. I don't know about y'all, but I didn't know that after something gets burned or charred, it can actually regrow and become even more dense and beautiful. So let's go ahead and look at our question. So our question says, which sentence most accurately, and I'm going to circle most accurately. Because remember, whenever we mark our test questions, we have to make sure that we understand the expectation that's being provided for that question. So it says, which sentence most accurately describes the author's purpose for writing this account? So we have our 4 answer choices. So go ahead and take a minute and think about your answer choice. If you want to hit pause here, that's totally fine. Otherwise, we can keep going. I'm going to flip my camera on again. Here we go. Whoa! So I chose answer C for the author's purpose is to show readers that even in this terrifying natural disaster, it has some benefits. So remember, the benefits that we had up here are that 1, it says, like a phoenix, the mythical phoenix, the blessed one is rising from the ashes, reborn, and very much alive. So now it's becoming habitable again. It went from being barren and uninhabitable to being very much alive, and things are growing and animal life is returning. So at the bottom part, we have to now do our show our thinking. And I can feel the groans and the eye rolls now. We have to use race. I know you are so sick and tired of me saying this, but you are making progress. So please don't give up on it yet. You can only imagine how much we've grown from the beginning of the year to now. So we're looking at our show our thinking. So it says using text evidence, and I'm going to put a box around that. Here we go. Back to me again. Hey guys. So I'm going to put a box around text evidence. So using text evidence, explain the author's point of view about Mount St. Helens. So remember, when we use race, you have to restate our question. We have to answer the question. We have to use our text evidence. And we remember that when we use our text evidence, we need 2 or more pieces of text evidence. That's the expectation for 8th grade, 2 or more. And I know you can do it. So what you're going to do from here, you're going to use our text evidence to explain the author's point of view. If you need an extra piece of paper to fully do your race response effectively, that is totally fine. Just make sure you attach it to the back of your packet, so that way I can see that you've done the work. So what you're going to do now, and this is the guided and independent practice. So we've come to the end of the we do it together. So now it comes on to the you do, guys. It's all on you now. I know it's crazy. So what we're going to do is you're going to read about the BP oil spill. And as you see here, I've marked my close reading. So make sure that you take a moment to pause and make sure that you have all the text information here that I have marked, so that way you can fully understand what you're supposed to be doing. So you're going to read about the BP oil spill. This, I remember watching this. It was super crazy. And then you're going to have to go ahead and remember, before we can finish, we have to mark our text questions. So as you can see up here, I have marked my text questions. So feel free to pause it at any point to make sure that you have your text test questions marked accurately. And then again, we have our bottom one, which is our constructed response. I know how you feel about them. I can still feel the eye rolls, but we still have to use race. I can tell you that on your unit test, there is 1 constructed response answer out of 10 questions. So the more we practice, it's like riding a bike. Once we know how to do it, we're going to be perfectly fine. So for your independent practice, this is the part that you have to do alone. Remember, like I said, you can always read and mark the text with a partner, but when it comes to answering the questions, you must do them alone. I need to see what you know, not what your friend knows. So you're going to read this article from a dire shortage of water. So it's already marked. So the questions or the paragraphs are already numbered for you. So that's one step that we don't have to do, but make sure that you go ahead and do our text markings. And before you do our text markings, we're going to make sure that we mark our questions. So I've marked the first questions. Remember, we're talking about reflecting. So it says, how does the content of the passage reflect the author's point of view? So reflecting means, how does it make them feel? How does it make them feel reflective of a time that they may not necessarily remember? Next, we have question number 2. And this one has 2 parts. So I circled 2. It has a part A and it has a part B. And for each of those parts, we're talking about the best describes. Not just that describes, all of them might describe them, but it's the one that best describes. And then we have our constructed response down here at the bottom. Even though I don't have it written, you know what you got to use. You got to use race. So that is our Bertram bit of information today. I hope this helps you guys out. Make sure that you get everything done so you can take your Unit 2 retake on Tuesday. If you have any questions, go ahead and shoot me an email. Don't forget to like and subscribe and have a awesome day. Bye, guys.